All right, our buddy Pete Lapp is back with us on the program, former FBI special agent in charge of espionage and also author of a book that will be coming out later on in the fall. It's called The Queen of Cuba, an FBI agent's insider account of the spy who evaded detection for 17 years. If you haven't heard the story about Ana Montes, Pete is back. He's going to tell us all about it. Pete, Mike, and Nick, good to see you again, my friend.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate having me on, and great to see you both as well.
Absolutely. You know, Pete, it's funny because we were just talking about this off air. Obviously, last night, NFL playoff games, you're a big Eagles fan, the excitement of all that stuff. And then we all wake up this morning and we find out that there's been another mass shooting in this country over in Monterey Park. At least 10 people have been killed in this attack. I know, obviously, it's a little bit different what you did for the FBI with respect to an investigation like this, if you would be a part of that. But first, just some of your takeaways of upon hearing the news and now what law enforcement's going to have to do to kind of sort this out.
Well, this is, again, another tragic event that we have to talk about, and they seem to happen all too frequently. This case is unique in the sense that there's still the subject is at large and on the run. And that's got to be terrifying for that community. A lot of times when these things happen, shooter is killed by law enforcement or commits suicide there, and at least the threat to the public, it ends in that moment, and it looks like it's continuing, and in the sense that until that individual is brought to justice and arrested, the community has a lot of fears. So I would think law enforcement is doing everything it can expeditiously, first and foremost, to identify this individual and trying to figure out where he or she is. But obviously my heart goes out to the victims and their families. This is just another incredibly tragic event that we wake up to in the morning, and it just seems like it doesn't end.
Yeah, I echo all of that. Nick and I spoke about it a little bit in the first segment. Pete, we're going to get into the book. I couldn't time this out better having you on the program to talk about all the classified document stuff with President Biden. We're going to get into that later on. And then we're going to get into your Twitter beef with Edward Snowden. So more on that in a bit. But first, Pete, tell us a little bit about last time you were on the program. You've been on a couple times, but last time you were on, we were talking about this book. And then you told us about Ana Montes and the story of it and how she was getting released on January 6th of this year. So she is out now. Tell people about the book and the story overall of your arrest of Ana.
So 10 days after 9/11, the FBI arrested Ana Montes, a woman who was spying for the Cuban government for, at that point in time, almost 17 years against the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, which is essentially the CIA for the Department of Defense. It's an incredible story, I think, and as I've researched more to it than I ever needed to know for the investigation and prosecution, I've learned so much more information that's really, really interesting. Shows how near perfect she was in her espionage that allowed her to go on for so long and undetected. I've learned how many near misses that we had, that we came close to the right person hearing the right information and the wrong person, including her, hearing about information that could have tipped her off. And I'm really looking forward to revealing these little nuggets that have found. But the story is interesting. The fact that she is out of prison is remarkable in and of itself, because I put her in that same category of Hansen and Ames and Snowden into the degree of damage and notoriety. She is a part of the annual security training that every government employee and every clearance holder goes through. So she's got that notoriety, and for her to be released and stay in the United States is probably what I have the most personal difficulty with, because she's so anti-American, and it seeps through her public statement that she made in the weekend after her release. But she's going to now live in the United States free under the blessings and freedoms that our country provides. And that's kind of hard to really get my head around, to be honest with you.
That it seems in contrast, when you mentioned Robert Hansen and Eric Snowden, folks who try to do their best to try to get as far away from the country as possible. What is it that, yes, there's the privilege, obviously, of being in the U.S., but this just feels odd that she feels safe enough to continue to live and operate within the United States. What is it about just her mentality or just her view of what she did that gives her the sense of safety, or the fact that she can be essentially unmolested as a U.S. citizen now, in contrast to other folks who have betrayed or been traitors to the United States, and let's be honest, she is a traitor, but who do seek refuge or intensely try to get as far away from the U.S. as possible.
Yeah, the most recent case, the case that I'm most aware of, obviously Snowden was very high profile, but Jonathan Pollard, who went to prison, I think he spent 27 years, and then when he's released, goes to Israel. So is not going to stay in the United States. I think Anna choosing to live in Puerto Rico, she is of Puerto Rican descent, so a lot of ethnic kind of connections to the island. She spent some time living there as a young adult with family. Puerto Rico is so unique in the sense that there's a lot of tension between Puerto Rico and the United States in terms of the identity. I've talked to some friends of some recent conversations with Puerto Rican individuals who admit that they don't necessarily feel American, and they feel Puerto Rican, as a nationality. So I think she'll probably, she could not have chose a better place to go in the United States to live in an area where she's going to feel comfortable and to create this new life that she has as a free woman, with a gap of 22-year gap in her resume because of spending time in the federal prison.
Pete, oh, you're gonna ask now, Nick?
Yeah, Pete. Obviously, with the book, and as you mentioned before, being mindful of just some just really interesting nuggets that'll be revealed as people read through your book. But what would you consider, if you're okay with sharing, one of the smaller details, but really revealing in the book that really sheds light on either on his mentality or the investigation, something that people are going to at first think, I don't know if this is that big a deal, but as reading the book later on realize that was a bigger nugget than they had given credit for.
The chapter I am most proud of that I wrote is a chapter called Runaway. And yes, it's based off of the Bon Jovi song. But it really is the beginning of the story for the U.S. government in terms of what we knew and when. And it's such a fascinating part of the story that hasn't been told in its entirety. And then the escape, if you will, is really, really dramatic. I think it goes to that chapter in particular goes to the insider threat from another government's perspective and what it takes for people to make that decision to betray their country and defect to the United States. But before they do that, provide intelligence to the U.S. intelligence community that helps start cases. And I can really, I'm in the middle of pre-publication review now. The government's going through and looking for classified information in my manuscript. And hopefully, we're going to have a very positive outcome here soon. So I have to be careful, but I think this part of the story, because I got it right from the sources, is really cool. And it's a chapter that I am so excited because it really shows the very beginning of the investigative story that hasn't really been revealed yet.
Pete, you were talking about before about how Ana Montes, in respect to all the training that happens now with field agents, whatever it may be, that she's kind of top of the list in terms of subject matter and, hey, let's learn from this. But can you expand on that a little bit? Like what lessons are current government officials, people training to become FBI agents, what are they learning from the Montes case? Or what would Pete Lapp want them to learn from the Montes case?
Well, it's beyond FBI agents. It's clearance holders. There's 4 million clearance holders that are required for the government and contractors that are required to have annual security training and then insider threat training. And she is one of several of the vignettes that are showed and shared, and the kind of lessons learned, because she didn't receive money for her espionage. She was ideologically motivated, and I like to say that she was more idealistic in her motivation. It shows that she was near perfect, so detection was very difficult, but kind of emphasizing the aspect of, the see something, say something. And there were times where certain things that she said started to draw some suspicions by certain people. And it was a matter of putting some dots together and connecting some dots. But you had to balance these little suspicions with this reputation that she had. I mean, this Queen of Cuba reputation, it's the book title, but I literally stole it from her reputation, because that's how many people saw her in the intelligence community. So when you have a little bit of there's something not right here, it's got to be in balance with the totality of this woman who's a highly skilled, highly accomplished, highly awarded and accredited intelligence analyst. So everything that, you have to look at these things in balance, I think, and that's where that perfection, near perfection, helps her get away with it for 17 years.
Our show is brought to you by the good folks at Fresh Roasted Coffee, freshroastedcoffee.com since 2009, making quality coffee at an amazing, affordable price. Hit the link right now in our episode description, and you can get a discount on this amazing coffee for being a listener and watcher of Can We Please Talk.
Pete, I want to pivot now, because last time we had you on the program, Pete, stop me if you've heard this before, former president had classified documents at his home. Well, now we have the latest story about President Biden and the classified documents that has been found in a few different locations from his time when he was vice president. I want to get first your overall takeaways on everything that's been coming out. Latest news that we covered in the first segment was that now 6 more documents, as the DOJ was investigating, doing a search of President Biden's home in conjunction with his attorneys. They turned up 6 more documents that happen to be from his time in the Senate, 6 more classified documents. So what are some of your overall takeaways, just at a high level, not necessarily comparing it to former President Trump, although you're seeing a lot of false equivalency of that, but expand on what Pete Lapp's initial impressions were of the classified documents found at President Biden's residence in office?
Yeah, so my perspective comes from being one of those 4 million clearance holders. I still have a clearance as a contractor. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. And I think that it sets a very poor example for current clearance holders, of which there's 4 million, in terms of handling classified information. Presidents and vice presidents, and even members of Congress, their background investigation goes through the election process. The rest of us have to go through investigation where our neighbors, our former employers are talked to. We are granted the privilege of having access to classified information. It truly is a privilege. You will not find anywhere in the Constitution that says you have a right to have access to classified information. It's a privilege. And every clearance holder who signs an SF-312, which is a document that's a contract, a non-disclosure agreement between you and the government, where you promise not to disclose and you promise to handle classified information in accordance with policy, regulations, and laws. And neither individual, former President Trump and current President Biden, neither handled classified information appropriately. And it's embarrassing for both of them.
When we release this episode, very likely what we're going to get, not so much from this interview, but when Mike and I talk about this, is when we bring up false equivalency between how the former president had handled this and currently what we're seeing, we'll get hit very likely with, well, you're leaning to the president, and this is the same thing, blah blah blah. Pete Lapp, former FBI or former member of the FBI, what is the difference between the reactions and the approaches between these two gentlemen as it relates to both of them recklessly handling classified documents?
So we're looking at this from a negligence perspective. Both behaviors were negligent. You can argue that former President Trump's was grossly negligent, just in terms of the volume and the amount. And I have a comment about volume and amount that we can make in a second or two. I think the behavior of both after the documents were found, after the government realized that they were both in possession, we can look at how they reacted and responded and see a distinct difference between, President Biden volunteering information, consenting to an FBI search that was, in my opinion, a very strong, positive move on his part. Whereas, former President Trump drug his feet and denied and delayed and was combative legally with the Department of Justice. I do think those are distinct differences that we can make. However, when we're talking about finding of classified information that dates back to his job at the Senate, we're not talking about, during the Obama administration when he was vice president. We're talking about at the Senate. And keep in mind, I think, Joe Biden probably has some type of, maybe not a SCIF, a secure room at his home in Wilmington, but he probably has an ability to, within regulation, store classified information in his home. He's the president. I'm sure they have built something in his home. It's not next to his Corvette. It's not in his garage in a locked container next to his Corvette. So I think legally he would have a right to keep classified information in his current home, but it's the where and how that I think is going to be highly scrutinized. And then obviously, what is this information? And if we're talking about information that dates back to when he was a senator, then the SCIF, that's where it should have been. But I don't really see the need to know and need to maintain that information well beyond when he was a U.S. senator. I mean, he hasn't been a U.S. senator since
Forever.
2008.
Right.
I mean, it's a long time ago. So it shows sloppiness, it shows negligence, and it shows me, a degree of carelessness that has, it could potentially, damage national security. If we're going to say this about Trump, we've got to say this about Biden, if we're being honest.
Totally.
But the reaction is different. The reaction is significantly different.
Yeah, I agree. And we talked about it in our last episode, but I love that you're bringing your expertise into it, because at a high level, and especially people that watch television news, as a former news producer, they don't know the difference. Former guy, classified docs, current guy, classified docs, at his home. They see commonalities and they just kind of breeze past it. So that's why I'm glad you're here breaking it down. I did want to ask you something on the investigation part of this, because, as more and more details have come out about this, and that the documents were initially found in November, and then December, more documents were found later on at his home. And now what we're finding out with January and over the weekend, 6 more documents from his time as senator. Is there anything in terms of the investigation process that you're a little bit shocked at? Like, hey, this is following proper protocol? Because I would argue some of this stuff from a transparency standpoint, hasn't been talked about, because it happened in November. We happened in December. What happened in November, Pete? We had a big midterm election. And again, whether or not it would have swayed it, who knows? But you had, an instance where a current president, who was then vice president, was mishandling classified docs. And the month prior, he chastised the former guy for doing the same thing. So from an investigation standpoint, you're still at the FBI. You hear rumblings about this. Or do you feel like everything has gone according to plan and they're playing it out the right way with respect to special counsel and now the escalation process? Or is there anything from the investigation process that's made you go, I wouldn't have done it like that. I don't know why it's being done like that.
I think if I were on Team Biden and advising them when the first batch of documents were found at the Penn Center, I would have said, look, we need to find anything. Let's scrub our every house, every office, every place there where there could be documents. If we're seeing sloppiness here and negligence here, then perhaps it's elsewhere. I would have had a much greater sense of urgency. And, I don't want to hear about that there's a lawyer who didn't have a clearance or does have a clearance. That to me is, I don't really buy that. You've got staff, you've got people. And there are people that have clearances that you can have that can go through your personal belongings and look and see if there's anything. I do think, again, it's a better response than we saw with the former president, but I don't like the delay. Like I don't see a sense of urgency that I would expect. And I think him being the current president complicates things dramatically. It definitely makes it much more difficult, not impossible, but I think, especially with the amount of people that he has working for him, no one expects Joe Biden himself to go look through his home and look through every file. We get that, but you got people that can do that and should have had a much more sense of urgency, in my opinion.
You would talk, as you were sharing earlier about, noticing volume about documents in these respective cases. What stands out to you about that?
So yes, former President Trump had a lot more documents. I mean, significantly more. Volume is an issue when you start thinking about intent and assessing whether someone had the intent to mishandle or were they negligent, right? I think that's going to be a key distinction. However, I'll go back to the Montez case because it's my own personal experience. We found on her computer 11 pages, what we called it the recovered text, 11 pages of single spaced. It was a conversation between her and the Cubans and her. And it took course over a period of time. The most damaging information, the most highly classified information that was on those 11 pages was 4 sentences. So when we talk about volume, it's a factor, but it's not the only factor. And, Hansen is in jail for the rest of his life, not because of the volume of information. It's because he gave up the name of 3 individuals who are cooperating with the U.S. government in the Russian government. Just 3 names. So it wasn't, he gave up a lot of volume, but my point is the type of information is significant as well. So we'll see what happens potentially with the Biden story, because will we know, I know that I saw an article this morning, I think in the Post, about Iran. Some of the information had to do with Iran. We'll probably never know as a public what's the totality of the information in either case, the Trump or the Biden case, but volume, let's caveat that by saying, 4 sentences could have gone Ana Montes potentially the death penalty. So it doesn't take volumes and volumes and volumes of documents to damage national security.
Pete, I'm so glad that you were talking about some of this stuff during our live show in DC about law enforcement agencies, because I wanted to ask you something, and I'm not sure if you saw that recent news article about the 3 active duty Marines that were charged in the January 6th Capitol riot. You had said something on our live show with respect to, if we start going under the hood of some of our agencies, we're going to head down a dark path and maybe find a lot of things that we don't like. And here's a perfect example of it. I would love to get your takeaways on that story of these 3 active duty Marines who were ready for Civil War II, according to reports upon their arrest. And then kind of piggybacking on what you did say back in our live show in October about the agencies and potentially white supremacy living amongst these folks, or even QAnon beliefs, or something that's not here in the fact and truth of this universe.
Yeah, it's. I seem to be a little clairvoyant, huh?
Yeah, I would say
there were 3 Marines who were charged as a result. I'm sure there were other law enforcement folks that were there, active duty law enforcement. I think we do have to. I think we have a white supremacy problem, and I think we have a conspiracy theory thinking problem within the government. And how do we address that is a big challenge. I went to an insider threat conference in October and heard from a lot of current government insider threat folks. And they are at least talking about this as something that they should be concerned about, which is a great sign for me. I was really encouraged to hear that we are going to be looking for this within our ranks, and who knows what we're going to discover. But we have to be careful, because we're not the thought police. We're not the First Amendment police. You can believe that vaccines are the worst thing ever. That's your personal beliefs. That's fine. You can believe that perhaps, and we've had FBI agents who are, whistleblowers who, one in particular didn't want to go out and effect an arrest of a January 6th individual. He wanted to be essentially a conscientious objector. Well, sorry, I think the FBI said it's your job. And you can have your views, but today your job is to go arrest this person on this valid arrest warrant. And if you refuse to do that, then you're not doing your job. We're not going to stick you on the phone desk that day. We're telling you to go do your job. So I think we have to be thinking and looking about these and having an honest conversation and understanding that there are people that are going to have views that are different from us. And where's that line? Where's that line? I mean, if we find a bona fide white supremacist in the Marines, the Army, the FBI, the CIA, whatever, we have to address that. But, if we find people that just disagree, we have to be really careful in not impeding upon First Amendment protected activities that even our government employees and our clearance holders, do have a certain degree of rights to. Now, if they're talking about overthrowing the government, if they're talking about, if they're using, racial slurs and all sorts of different types of things, that obviously would be a problem in government service. But where's that line? If I disagree with the vaccines or I disagree with January 6th, should I still have a clearance? And I think that the government is still trying to figure that out, but I was encouraged that they are talking about it and looks like they're looking into it. And we see evidence of that with the arrest of these 3 Marines.
Yeah. Pete, before we let you go, I want to ask you, we talked about it at the beginning. You're going to elaborate a little bit more. If you ever watched that YouTube show, Hot Wings, they always ask, explain this social media moment as one of the questions to the folks eating hot wings. All right, Pete Lapp, you got to explain why you and Edward Snowden are going back and forth on Twitter and he eventually blocked you. Tell our audience here why you were getting into it with Edward Snowden.
Why did he ask him why he blocked me? I don't know. It surprised me. First of all, one of the things I do is I teach for a government course, and I use this example when we talk about Snowden about he has 5.1 million Twitter followers, which scares the hell out of me because I wonder how many of those 5.1 million Twitter followers hold clearances as well, and they're maybe sympathetic to him. So I was teaching this 2 weeks ago, and I said, well, let me make sure. And I pulled up on Twitter, and I realized I got blocked by him. So I tweeted, what was it? Something I said, and I think what probably put me over the edge for Eddie is when I called him Eddie, and his mother called him Eddie once, and then I think the other part was when he became a Russian citizen, and I had the audacity to call him out about, well, I mean, you're going to go serve in Ukraine now that you're a Russian citizen. I know you were an ex-Green Beret, but actually washout Green Beret. So maybe he didn't like my sarcasm. My jersey comes out sometimes, but I now have the distinct honor and privilege to have been blocked by the Edward Snowden. Wow. And my kids, my son thought it was the coolest thing. My 21-year-old son thought I was a badass. So,
well, listen,
I thought dad cred, which is really cool.
Right. I thought it was really cool too. I mean, I'm blocked by Gabrielle Union for some reason. I have no idea why. Never talked to her in my life. So that's a little bit cooler, Edward Snowden, and obviously relatable since you guys both work.
Look, it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much. Just call Eddie and a washout, and you'll get blocked, I think. So,
seriously. Well, Pete, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. The timings every time we have you on this program. I mean, I don't know who's going to be president in 2024, but Pete, keep your phone on you just in case we need you to explain the mishandling of classified docs that they go through. You can follow Pete Lapp across social media. Go pre-order the book for when it comes out later on in Q4. As they say in the business world, the Queen of Cuba, an FBI agent's insider account of the spy who evaded detection for 17 years and a month. As if you don't know that story, go get Pete's book, and it's going to explain more. Pete, can't thank you enough, buddy. You're always welcome back on the program whenever. Continued success to you, man. Stay safe.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for watching the Can We Please Talk podcast. Whatever clip you just watched, we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stick around for some more. Subscribe to the channel. My partner's over here smashing the button. Come on, do him a favor. So hit subscribe.